Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be back in the West Midlands, and it's great to be in Wolverhampton, and I'm very proud to be associated with this university. I've been asked to talk about my global experiences over the last 3 years. For those of you who don't know me, the previous 20 I worked in the NHS as a Chief Exec at the University Hospital Birmingham, Chief Exec of South Central Strategic Health Authority, and then the Director General at the Department of Health, but don't worry, I'm better now. The slides themselves are quite wordy, a little bit like the author, but I decided to give you some words on the slides because I know that you're going to take them away, and there'll be some students in here that may go on this wonderful course that's just been advertised so subliminally to us. I have had the privilege in the last 3 years to work in 36 countries on nearly 100 occasions. So if you work it out, that's basically I'm on the road 30 to 35 weeks a year. And I just come back yesterday from France, and I'll say a little bit more about France later on. The reason why I start with this is because you need to know that there isn't one country that I've met that defines or uses the term commissioning. So this is a very English, as we all know, it's a very English experiment that started 21 years ago. Actually, when I joined the NHS, when Margaret Thatcher introduced commissioning, the purchaser-provider split, in the white paper Working for Patients. I know that Harry Ward remembers that because he's as old as the hills. Hello, Harry. Even older than David Lawton. I want you to take a second. I know this is being filmed, so I'm afraid I'll have to read it as well. But given that I am in a university today, I thought I'd start with a hypothesis. And for those of you that believe in Hegel or Karl Marx, you know that the dialectic is the antithesis, thesis, and then synthesis. And basically what I'm hoping is that we get some discussion going this afternoon. I'm doing the global bit, and then Gary will do the local bit. But this is my contention, this is my argument, that no other country in the world uses the phrase commissioning, nor do they practice commissioning. But I'm not arguing today that commissioning should be jettisoned. I'm merely here today to suggest we should try and implement it 21 years after it was first introduced. Now, my definition of commissioning is the classic commissioning cycle of assessing need, of deciding what your priorities are, of then designing services, of procuring, either within the public sector or between the public and the private sector, then purchasing those services, and then holding those services to account. So so hopefully we're all on the same page, because, and this is not just a nuanced difference. Of course, if you see insurance companies, which do predominate across most of the developed world, that they have a more passive relationship between the people that pay the insurance funds and the people that receive services. And then you'll go to other parts of the world where you simply have a funding relationship, where one organisation basically is grateful for the services that another organisation provides and funds those services. What's implicit in my definition of commissioning is it's a bloody difficult job. It's intellectually stimulating, and I think to implement and execute, you need to be a practitioner of the highest possible quality. So it doesn't surprise me that it's been difficult over the last 21 years, but as other people have said this morning, it doesn't help if it keeps getting reorganised every 2 or 3 years. Unlike those of us that have been successful chief execs in provider organisations that are as old as the hills. They were created through the abolition of the monasteries back in the 16th century. And please, somebody ask me a question about that later on so I can tell you why. I'm further going to argue that given our fiscal position, then I actually think there should be more differentiation, not less. So those of you that know me, I believe in the foundation movement. I tried my best with commissioning to set people free. I'm not so sure that the sort of centralised control that we're seeing at the moment is right for the service in terms of its sustainability over the next 5 to 7 years. And therefore I'm arguing that there should be more success, and I'm telling you directly there also should be tolerance of failure. And that's because you can't go at the pace of the slowest, which is usually what you get when you get national systems trying to move. You have to go at the pace of the quickest, and that means that if you want to innovate and reward the innovators, you've also got to support those that fail or those that are slower. And that's why, in a sense, I do think this experiment, this worldwide experiment, in terms of giving primary care physicians or clinicians purchasing power, is bound to end up in success and also failure. And I think how that is responded to or regulated or managed regionally and centrally will be a hallmark of the NHS for right or wrong for the next 5 years. I'm also going to suggest that actually, given that the NHS makes a lot about being the fourth largest organisation in the world, you all know this, don't you? So it's the Chinese Red Army, the Indian railway workers, Walmart and the NHS. By the way, it's now the 7th largest in the world, and that's because the China telecoms and power industries are bigger than the NHS, but we'll put that to one side. But when people usually talk about size, as we know from people who talk about size too often, we know that there's an insecurity behind it. And I'm speaking from deep personal conviction. I want you to know that this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. But if you're going to talk about size, you best use it. And so sometimes we get this issue about subsidiarity completely wrong. We nationalise things that should be localised, and we localise things that should be nationalised. And the reason why I say that is there are two things that are said to me as I go around the world. Genuinely, people are bewildered when they say, so you're going to give all this money to independent private sector contractors called GPs. And I thought that it was all going pretty well over the last 10 years. So I explain it's a natural evolution, it's the right thing to do, it's putting power in the hands of those that can redesign services most locally. But the second thing they say in terms of the NHS is that if it could only be like Kaiser at scale, then the quality that it would produce would be phenomenal. So I think the balance between getting clinical commissioning groups right and having the basis of one of the best health systems in the world, called the National Health Service, is really trying to get commissioning right at a local level. And this slide is suggesting that if we try to do too much from the centre, we will destroy any innovation and crush the will to live from those that are the next cadre of commissioners that need to be, I think, pretty adventurous. And so you can see here, finally, that I conclude by suggesting that if we're not going to set people free and create more success and failure and continue to try and second guess what commissioners want to do, then basically you might be better off having a regional and a national structure for the next 3 or 4 years if you decide that money is the most important thing to sort out. But I don't believe that. I believe you sort the money out by being ruthless on quality and innovating very quickly. So that's my hypothesis. These slides are in your pack. I'm afraid I don't think I've got a clicker, which is a shame. But this slide here basically tells you all you need to know about different systems. So it shows you that for varying percentages of gross domestic product, GDP, you get different expectancy rates by each country. And you can see here on my far right, Australia, 8.7% of its GDP. Average life expectancy at the bottom of nearly 82 years, compares pretty well to the United States of America, where you've got 17.4% of GDP producing 78 years worth of life on average. Now, what I'm going to suggest in a moment, I'm going to skip through the world and just show you briefly how different systems are organised. Remember that the key theme is that nobody else does commissioning. We shouldn't get rid of it, but we should actually make it work. If it doesn't work in the next 2 years, and if people decide that money is the real game in town, then there's an easier way to structure the health service. But the cost will be quality and outcomes for patients and the population. That's my argument. What's, I think, also quite interesting about this slide is that although, of course, we have spent a lot of money over the last 12 years. I helped to write the NHS plan of 2000 with Tony Blair and Alan Milburn. We haven't caught up. Other countries carried on spending in Europe in particular. And so at some stage there is going to be a debate, not now by the way, the economy is not fit to have the debate, but we are, as you can see, hovering around 9%. And most of the European countries that are pushing ahead, by the way, the Dutch now system is considered to be the highest performing health system in the world. You will see that they're spending nearly 12% of GDP. So this basically tells you can organise your system in different ways, and for more or less money you get the same or better outcomes. So there's no God-given right that the NHS has to continue with commissioning. That's the second point. The third point is, and I think we should be proud about this as English people, people of England, is these slides on the top are looking at public attitudes to their health systems. And there, you'll be pleased to know, there is no correlation between low GDP spend, high life expectancy, and popularity of systems by the people. So just a little quirk, I thought I'd throw that out. And these two slides compare just two different things. The first one is public satisfaction or perception with the health system. And the second that just came out last month, I don't think you will have seen it yet, comes out of a research institute in Sweden, the Euro Consumer Index. And you can see here, these are patient perceptions of quality of care. Two bits of news, as you can see. The UK, 62% of people in the United Kingdom thinks the system works well, with only 34% thinking fundamental changes are needed. Compare that to America. Wasn't it good news yesterday that the Supreme Court upheld Obamacare? A very important announcement for all sorts of reasons. But you can see here the Dutch score most highly, but in terms of patient satisfaction, we've still got a way to go. But there again, so is Serbia. I just want to say a word about the developing world, because if I was to give another presentation today about the 6 key facets of high-performing health systems, I would conclude by saying, and the people that will adopt this most quickly will be in India and then China. Now, you know that they spend a relatively low percentage of their GDP on health at the moment, wild health inequalities, often separated by urban and rural. But the point is, by 2020, their middle class, in terms of its purchasing parity power, will be the same as the West. And by 2030, the East will have beaten the West. Now, it's important for two reasons. One, it shows you that a lot of trade and muscle will come out of the East over the next 10 years. But their per capita income, of course, is much less than ours. Many of them existing on less than $10 per month, compared to, obviously, the Western equivalent, which is a lot greater. The point of that is that they are not going to copy the classic 19th, 20th and 21st century developments in terms of health development in a linear fashion. They will be jumping quite quickly over the 20th century as far as they're able to in terms of technology. And the reason why I mention that is because at the end of my presentation today, one of our clients, Kaiser, has kindly allowed me to use some slides to show you what they're thinking about as a commissioner in terms of harnessing technology with personalisation and using that through commissioning. So I wanted to leave with a sort of a quick flash of boldness about thinking what commissioners can do. By the way, for the avoidance of doubt, I've never believed that commissioners should try and micromanage hospitals. We've got brilliant people that do that. They should be much more thinking about the outcomes and then putting it out there as opposed to trying to manage every FCE or outpatient attendance. That for me is no more than funding and basic and crude antediluvian performance management. And you don't get system change by looking at that. And I just hope that we don't crush the GPs by making them into mini PCT managers. I'm sure that won't be the case. But don't change. So, let me just skip through these very quickly. I think you'll hear a lot more about Korea because I think it's a pretty smart system. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on each slide. I'm just merely going to go through around the world now quickly. Korea has a national insurance system. It's funded by public and private funds through taxation and also contributions to personal insurance. All of the supply side is basically liberated. A few teaching hospitals are owned by the state. The rest are either for-profit or voluntary organisations. You can see here it spends only 7% of its GDP and it has a life expectancy of 80 years or so. They don't practice commissioning. They have a fairly traditional insurance model. In Japan, which is similar, they have largely employer-based. It largely mimics, in a sense, the American models, ironically, that were developed after the Second World War. Here you can see that employers and also voluntary social insurance, basically have a blended split of 80%, 20%, 17% public and private. And in Japan, all of the hospitals basically are independently managed. Most of them are not for profit. Once again, its GDP spend is only 8.5%, life expectancy 83. They don't practice commissioning. One of the most successful systems in the world now, rated in the top 3, Australia. I'm sure many of you have been to the country. Medicare system with top-up voluntary insurance. Some public hospitals, many not-for-profit. Split between public and private sector is 70-30 roughly in terms of public hospitals and private hospitals. You're starting to get the picture that basically co-insurance in some form or other is a key feature of these systems, as is the liberalisation of the supply side. The Netherlands, probably the most interesting experiment. In 2006, a big debate that had been going on for 20 years. They decided to create competition between commissioners. There are now basically 5 national commissioners in the Netherlands. Patients can choose. In the first year that the system went live in 2006, 17.4% of patients choose to move to a different insurer. Now, 6 years later on, it's just 4% per annum. But that 4% is material, of course, because if you're losing 4% of your revenue stream or your membership, it's going to make you more responsive to your membership. You can see here that there's a debate about how that's funded, largely through risk equalisation between the 6 insurance funds, and they've embraced full competition. So if you want, ironically, it's not America, if you want to look at how a competition-led commissioning system is built, go to the Netherlands. Recently, we've just appointed the Deputy Prime Minister of the Netherlands, Walter Bos, to be our Head of Health in the Netherlands, and I'd be delighted one day, Linda, if you want to invite him over to give you a conversation about this. It's a very interesting system. There's one thing I want to say about this, because this is not a political comment, and this is not an argument for insurance. I think, by the way, globally, the trend is that commissioners, insurers, are consolidating, because they need more critical mass and power to face down the providers. So I'm not in favour for massive fragmentation of commissioning. Perhaps we might talk about what clinical commissioning groups can do for themselves and what they have to do in an aggregate form later on. But what's interesting about this system is this week there was a big debate in the National Parliament where they decided to put the deductible or the co-payment up from €220 to €325. And one thing I've noticed as I travel the world, that partly because of the nature of our parliamentary democracy, but because our system is funded through general taxation, when we want to have a debate about increasing funds for the health service, it invokes the mother of all arguments between political parties. And so we go through these sort of convulsions where we have 10 years of feast and then 10 years of famine. What other systems do is they decide to make the patient pay more through a deductible. Now, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I just want you to think about that. And a lot of the heat is taken out of the system because of the way that they try and get the patient or member or beneficiary to put more skin in the game. And all of these systems, as you know, that most of the European systems are, and here we go, they are defined as Bismarckian systems, whereas the Nordics and the UK are defined as beverage systems. And Bismarckian systems basically still believe in the principle of social solidarity, leave no person behind, but the way that they fund and commission that work is fundamentally different to the Nordics into the United Kingdom, which is largely a general taxation method. I was in Germany with the health minister 3 weeks ago. They're in a lot of trouble. Ironically, the German health minister doesn't have much control over the system at a federal level. He was saying, I can't grab hold of these people. They won't listen to me. I want to design something where they listen to me a bit more. And what was interesting about that is because obviously a lot of this is, although you have a federal Department of Health, a lot of it in Germany is obviously regionalised. So you have competition between sick funds, and of course you have competition between public and private sector organisations. Along with the Netherlands, Germany and the Netherlands have the longest experience of DRG payments and the ways in which you can motivate or demotivate providers to perform in different ways. The French system, where I was this week rather, is an interesting variation of Bismarck and beverage. So you have statutory insurance, and then 90% of the population now take out voluntary insurance. So when I saw the French system this week, I was thinking social care in England. And what the French are starting to debate now is how much of the co-payment or deductible patients have to pay for themselves. I'm suggesting, therefore, there are different ways in which you can start to think about motivating the performance of a system, and also there are different ways in which the state connects with an individual patient or member, which gives you more or less for your money. Systems which are similar to the United Kingdom, Sweden, I'm sure some of you know about the Swedish system, largely funded through general taxation, based on, if there is another mention of commissioning anywhere in the world, it's the Stockholm commissioning system, largely based around their local councils, where they have a pretty well-integrated system of health and social care. So I think that might be a good area, Linda, for people to study when they come on your course. And that has been pretty good in dealing with the elderly, as has Norway, which is a similar situation, but they have 4 regional health authorities. I think before I come to the last 2 countries, it's worth saying one thing I have noticed around the world is that people are very proud to define their system as a public system or as a private system, as a collaborative system or a competitive system. And actually, once you get beyond and behind that political rhetoric, these systems work in a variety of different ways. And the best example is Canada. The Canadian health system, which was established in 1946 by a Scottish GP, who was even further to the left than Bevan, but passionately believe in a public health service provided free at the point of delivery. Yet 25% of the costs of Canadian healthcare is paid by individuals through private insurance. They obviously choose to define themselves about what they're not, which is American. And the Canadians are starting to experiment in the province of Ontario with local health integration networks, LINs. So you've got some commissioning in Sweden and a little bit starting in Canada. But they're the only 2 countries that I've found that are sort of dabbling in commissioning. And finally, of course, the United States, which many people think is the most grotesque example of private healthcare. Interesting to note that now that Obamacare has been supported by the Supreme Court, I have a £1 coin in my pocket. Would anybody care to guess, when Obamacare is finally enacted in 2014, what percentage of funding will the state be responsible for in the American healthcare system? The greatest private system known to mankind on the planet. Would anybody like... Linda, you're a professor, you're very clever. What's your answer?
I think it's going to be quite high, actually. I think it's quite high.
Well, give me a number.
2%.
How many?
About
20. Do I hear higher or lower? Gentleman there.
60.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So in 2014, Medicare and Medicaid will account for 60% of all funds. That's an amazing catch. We practiced that in rehearsal and he didn't get it right. So the point is, the world is not what it seems. If we can move away from political ideology and get down to the business of organising care, there's a better chance of giving patients and the public a better deal. Okay, final 3 slides before I nicely segue into the local agenda. These are very simple slides, but the chap that presented them is a guy called George Halverson, who is the president, because they're all presidents in America, of Kaiser. I think Kaiser I think the American system is a poor system of healthcare. I think Kaiser is a jewel in the sea, and because it's an integrated, closed system like the NHS. But more than the NHS, of course, it integrates its clinicians. It integrates its primary care physicians with its hospital doctors. It says if you want to be a member of our team, you've got to play by our rules. We're going to set 25% of your pay on your quality. We're going to monitor you each month in open audits and hold you to account for the resources that you use. We want to make sure that our membership of 9 million increases. So, and of course, they're a not-for-profit organisation, but they do generate a profit to sustain their long-term viability. Now, so I think when we talk about integration, because we're fixated by structures in England, we never get past the structural debate. We never get to the patient. We never truly segment the population, because our primary care system is based from a 19th century concept. We need to bulk up our primary care system. And the reason and that's why, in response to the questions that were asked this morning, If I think that the real change that will prove that CCGs can work will be in transforming primary care and stratifying and segmenting the 1, 5 and 10% of the population that drive 30, 50 and 80% of the cost. Now there are what, 300,000 people that live in Wolverhampton? Give or take, 200,000? 250? So what's 1% of that? I work for an accountancy firm, I should know that. 2,500. Is it that difficult to look after them? Is it that difficult to look after 7,500? Is it that difficult to look after 25,000 people? Really? So if I was a clinical commissioning group, the first thing I'd do is I'd basically start to think about my investment in information technology, how I levered the healthcare team in the community and with secondary care, how I entice secondary care consultants to come and work for me, not like in the old fund holding days. I remember that when we all had to do outpatient clinics in small GP surgeries once a month to see 4 patients. I remember that very well at St Mary's Hospital in London when I worked. I think you should start to create integrated care organisations, uber smart integrated care organisations, and you start to say to hospital consultants, come and work for us for a day a week. And let's keep all of these patients basically in their homes or in the community. Just a thought. And the reason why I say that is because this is what Kaiser are now proving. This is not a theory. They've spent $4 billion. It's not a lot of money, but of course they're not as big as the NHS. We wasted £6 billion. But what they've done is the future of commissioning is to be tech savvy, to turn data into knowledge, into action. And only you can do that because you have the mandate to be a population health-based maintenance organisation. And you can see here what the results are starting to say in Kaiser. 40% of outpatient consultations being made redundant. Now that's a pretty significant figure. And what Kaiser are doing is they're now starting to reclassify their business into 4 building blocks. Now, probably my son, who's aged 2, and my daughter, who's aged 7, could possibly, over 2 days and some crayons, come up with these 4 areas. So I'm not suggesting these 4 areas are rocket science. What I am suggesting, however, is they're now starting to organise their business around these 4 areas. So I might end or hand over to Gary where I started, but there's no God-given right for commissioning to work, that no other country in the world practices it. After 21 years, why don't we give it a try? And let's not try and second-guess commissioners by having a monolithic, central and regionalised structure that crushes the living life out of innovation. There has to be failure to achieve success, and success means innovation, and innovation means speed, meeting consumer and customer needs. And the best I think we can achieve over the next 2 years before the election is where there's some stunning examples of how primary care can bulk itself up by looking at the 1%, the 5% and the 10% of the population. And that's why I am hopeful for clinical commissioning groups, as long as they are very clear about what they can do and what they can't do, because in the rest of the world, insurance companies are consolidating because you need critical mass to change the nature of provision in any local community. Gary, over to you.